from a recovery point of view in a treatment program, you treat things kind of like family. There's this connection, support, being willing to sit down with somebody at 1 o'clock in the morning, not just the clinical, you're going to do this, this, and this. So I think that that has an impact on how we respect the kids, treat the kids, and require family involvement.
All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Finding New Waters. My name is B. Reeves. I'm the Director of Business Development here at New Waters in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm sitting here with our CEO, Justin McClendon, and our very special guest today is John Lieberman, who is the CEO of Visions out in California, which is the premier treatment center for adolescents, definitely the gold standard. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, man. I know this is the middle of your morning, and it's a Friday, so thank you.
Love Fridays.
Yeah, well, I hear you. You know, the weekends and Fridays don't have quite the same weight they used to, you know, but this time 7.5 years ago, I would be chomping at the bit to get going here for all the wrong reasons. But just a quick backstory, you know, I started working in this field just almost a little over 5 years ago in the height of early COVID, where everything was shut down. You know, pretty much every meeting I had was, you know, not quite this professional, but, you know, was virtual, and conferences weren't really happening. And then a year later, the first conference I ever attended was up in, not Montreat, but one of those retreat centers up in Asheville, Cayuga, I think, actually. And John was one of I think you were the first speaker I ever saw at a conference in this field. And so I have a very, you know, you have a special place in my heart there, man.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, how did you, you know, I know a little bit about you, but I want to keep it a little fresh. I mean, the main thing I know that I've always found so amazing about you is you got sober at 17 years old.
I did. Yeah. So March 25th, 1985, I got sober, and it wasn't my first treatment, you know, experience either. I went through, it was my second program. It was called ASAP, Family Treatment Programs. Great name, right? It was Adolescent Substance Abuse Program. And it was on the third floor of a psychiatric hospital in Pasadena. So, you know, it was an experience. And I'd been in another program before that, August of 1984, and stayed sober for a little bit, but really got kind of the bug and the excitement about recovery and what my life could be like, you know, going through that program and seeing people and meeting people who I felt like, well, maybe my life could be different. Maybe this could be a different experience than what I had maybe envisioned for my life. And I remember this guy, his name was Kerry. He came walking down the hall, and he was in cowboy boots. He had long hair, a beard, and drinking a big cup of coffee, and rode an old knucklehead to work. And I was like, that's my guy. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of hope, because my parents were very conservative, and I didn't look at the world that way necessarily, especially at 17 years old. So there, it gave me a little bit of hope that sobriety could be something exciting and fun.
Got a question for you. What's a knucklehead?
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like,
A knucklehead's an old motorcycle. I think the first one's probably in the 40s, 50s, but
oh wow,
it's a you know, like a kickstart Harley Davidson that leaks everywhere it goes, kind of a thing,
nice.
you know. So and this is a good story. I remember we were on our way to Palm Springs, sitting in the back of the car, and this motorcycle comes, kind of this group of motorcycles goes past us, and I remember this guy. He had a beard, wearing like a tank top. So this is probably in early 70s, and he was riding. It was a big chopper, and he was riding like this. He didn't even have his hand on the wheel, so like this. And his girlfriend, I think that he would have said his old lady, was on the back, asleep, like this. And my parents, the disdain in their face for this part of culture was so evident. And all I thought was, I don't want to do that, you know. So I didn't tell them that at the time.
But a seed was planted.
A seed was planted. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, that's so, not to dwell too much on, you getting sober young, but I mean, I always find it fascinating. And to me, it just seems like, it's easy for me to say there's no way that would have worked for me when I was that young. But, there were times where, I got in trouble and DUIs and, drinking things happen where I wonder if the message were presented to me at the right time when I was kind of, licking my wounds a little bit. Cause I just feel like we all have these kind of windows, a finite number of windows of opportunity. And I don't think I missed a window, but I mean, if the window had sort of been presented, if that makes sense. But like, what was that like being 17 years old in California, sober when your friends and peers are not even thinking about it?
Yeah. Well, I think a few things. I think, like you said, what's that message that how do you give the message to kids? First of all, it's being authentic and real. Kids when you're young, you're kind of altruistic. It's like, just wanting things to be right in your world and then being completely defiant and angry and shaking your fist at the world and at God, at everything else when something's not right in somebody else's world, right? So treatment for me, there's a few things that were like these glimmers, these things that stuck with me through this process. One of them was that, and a lot of people in yeah, young people's programs, we talk about, like, first it starts with fun, then it's fun with problems, and it's just problems, right? And the other part that impacted me when I first went to treatment, and when you go to treatment for the second time, anybody knows, once after the first time, when it's just you don't know what's going on, the second time is just, oh, good Lord, how could I be in this again, right? It's a defeated, frustrating feeling, especially with an adolescent program where the door locks behind you and you were told that you're just going for a drug test and essentially you've been gooned into a program,
Mm.
and there's a few things that happen. So as I was walking down the hall, that the counselor was walking me, said, "You got to meet the kids. There's 35 kids in this program," and the door opens and three guys are walking out. They had just done a panel. They were in recovery talking about their experience. Well, one of the guys walking out was in the first treatment program I had been in. I don't even remember his name, but the experience was, as he walks past me to go out the locked doors, he goes, "Hey, John, what's up?" And I don't know, the shame, the impact of that. And at the same time, I had this glimmer of, that should have been me. That
Mm.
should have been me. That could have been me. I could have been here doing that. So that was the first thing. And then that kind of set me up. I didn't talk to many people at first. There was a lot of younger kids in there. I didn't talk much. My drug of choice was methamphetamine. So I was coming down and not doing well. I was living on the streets basically, kind of couch surfing a little bit, but my parents essentially hadn't seen me but maybe once in 3 months. So from like uh, early December all the way into March, and and I'm listening to everybody complain. They're complaining, and this is an interesting piece. I think it's really important from an addiction point of view, uh, is that and parents are affected by this and loved ones, where the person with the problem keeps pointing the finger outward, right? It's you, it's parents, it's the authorities, it's my job, it's the college, it's whatever. So and I was just listening, and all I thought was, I'd already graduated from high school, which is a weird thing. I graduated at 16. So I had all the things at my disposal. And meanwhile, I'm driving it into the ground, right? All the opportunities in the world. And what I was listening, I remember about first thing I shared in group was, "What the fuck are you talking about? You're here." Sorry about my language. But what are
It's
you
okay.
talking
You're
about?
fine.
You're here. I'm here. It's about me. It's about you. And you're complaining about everybody else that you have no control over, which is, from a recovery point of view, is such a good foundation, because it also interwove for me with surrender. Like, it's me. I'm the only one that's going to make a difference in this thing, no matter what happens.
Yeah. Well, and then eventually we learned that when we're pointing the finger, then the three are pointing back at us. And like you just said, it's a me problem. I can't change other people. And,
Yeah.
I know that from knowing you and, reading about you, you've kind of done every job in the treatment space. But what did you do, like, when you were 17 up to when you started working at it? I mean, what was that like?
Oh, that's a great story. So first of all, I'm really at just basically the anniversary of 40 years working in the field. So
Okay.
so
That's great.
yeah, I mean, really, it's pretty exciting, especially as young as I am, to be 24 years old and have done it for that long. It's great, isn't it? So the well, so this is where I think part of my commitment to treatment excellence for kids comes into play is that I didn't know what I was going to do. Originally, I was going to go in the military. That was my plan. My mom thought, I just got to get him out of here. I'll sign him up the day he turns 17. He's already got a diploma. I but when I went through my first treatment center, my mom was like, "And we're going to go sign you up now." And I said, "Mom, I can't go in the military." She said, "Oh, yes, you can, because you can't be at home." And I was like, "Oh, well, okay, let me explain some things." What I, at that year in 1985, if you had a military ID, you could drink on base, you could
Mhm.
get alcohol. That was my motivation to go in the military. So I told her that, and she said, "Oh yeah, you shouldn't go in the military." She very quickly understood that this is not a great plan. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. My parents were like, "When you get out of here, you got to go work at Wendy's or Arby's or whatever place. Just get a job, right?" And all I could think was, and if I work at one of those places, I'm going to be doing meth again so fast, right? And I was afraid, and I didn't get to go live back at home, so there was a lot of like things, kind of fears and concerns, right? So my doctor, Dr. Jim Keener, sweetheart of a guy, he said, "Well, let's get an aptitude test for you." Everybody back then, they got an MMPI, which is basically a personality inventory to show where you have strengths, weaknesses, if you have like depression, anxiety, psychosis. But he said, let's do an aptitude test. So I did. And it came back with, um, you really like helping people. And anytime I did have a job, I worked really hard, but I could see very quickly that my motivation, even working really hard, whether I grew up out in the country, whether I was, building fences or hauling wood or whatever it was, I wanted to do a good job for whoever I was working for. And so I looked and I said, "What does that mean?" And Dr. Keener said, "Well, John, what that means is if you stay sober till you're 18, which is about 90 days away or so, a little more, 103 days away, um, you could get a job working like as a tech, a floor tech. Because back then, if you had somebody who's 18 years old who had 90 days or more sober, that's such a big deal. They would hire us, especially if we'd been through the program. So literally, July 29th, 1985, I got a job. And the guy who hired me, his name was Lou. He had been sober 7 or 8 years, which I thought was just, he was everything. He hired me call part-time for graveyard shift, which is the lowest of the low. I started working there in 85. I left there in about 2000. So about 15 years I was there. And I started as a tech and I left as the director of national outreach, you
Oh,
know.
wow.
It's
And
amazing.
while I was there, I went back to school and I got initially a degree in business management. And a lot of people ask, why didn't I get a degree to be a clinician? And somewhere inside of me, I thought, I meet a lot of great clinicians, right? Um, I meet clinicians in a lot of programs, but what I don't see is places where the programs are designed to support what the clinicians do. That's the focus. And this isn't a criticism. It was more like, I think we can do a better job supporting the clinicians and the work that they do. And from a culture kind of overview, I mean, later I got some more education, but that was kind of that was absolutely my motivation in going to school from a business point of view, was to have that impact, hopefully, in the programs I was involved in. And also then I kind of start, if you hear me talk a lot, I try to spread that message to leaders and to people in the industry, and just any kind of business, right? If we think about how do we support the skills and the work that our employees are doing.
John, there's have you so you've always worked with the adolescent population, it
Mhm.
sounds like, is that correct?
Well,
So there's
okay, so I did for 2 years. I went in the early days. I went to work for Promises Treatment
okay.
Center, and so I left the program I had been in and went to work for Promises for 2 years, and and I was their first national outreach person, and so I was just on the road all the time, and so for 2 years, and then my first contract that I got, I did in like 4 or 5 contracts for about a year and a half, but my first contract was with Visions, where I am now, and
Very
I
cool.
came here because, well, I knew the adolescent market really well. Um, and when I was meeting with Chris Schumo, we were having coffee and we were just talking about he didn't know a lot about adolescent treatment. So I was kind of his ear to bend. Then I came on as a contractor, and then I was sitting out in front of the facility one day, waiting for a meeting with Chris. And I have kids. My kids are now um, 37 and 38. In fact, my oldest daughter and her husband and father own a treatment center up in Utah. And she said, I will never be involved in treatment. But so it's really fun. I get to tease her now that they're running a program for men up there. But um, uh, my kids at that point were just going into middle school, and it was it was tough. I was on the road every other week, and when you get a phone call from the school that says, we just found your daughter in the parking lot smoking pot, and I'm like in a conference, eating pralines in Savannah, Georgia, and I'm like, I got to change this. And so
Mm.
I kind of was writing a letter to God, sitting out in front of the facility, and I walked in because I was trying to find Chris and I had tried to find a new director for the program, and I just walked in and said, I think I need to be the director. And Chris said, it's about time,
Hmm.
and so then I worked out of the contracts and basically started working at Visions full time. I think that was in 2004.
Awesome.
That's fantastic. The I mean, there seems to be an obvious connection in between, like, when you got sober and what your own personal story is and, like, maybe a desire to work with adolescents. Is that a safe assumption or
Oh my gosh, yeah. So that's part of my mantra of okay, so first of all, I went into treatment when I was young. That connection with it's my responsibility, not anybody else's, kind of everybody else can fuck right off. It's about me. And I say that in a spiritual way. Um, and then, and what would happen when I first went to meetings, I was still of that group that would hear from people, you're too young. You know, how can, are you a real alcoholic? Are you a real addict, or whatever real is, and, and I absolutely was, and my friends were dying, and I tried doing it on my own, and so a bit of that is my continued rebellion against the system, that respecting kids' ability to connect spiritually, to connect emotionally, that there can be change in their lives, that their families can change, all of that, because I see it and have seen it, and that I also just considering the impact that just one young person, like, just if we just took it financially speaking, for the world as a whole, that somebody's not going to jail, they're not ripping you off, but they're actually giving back and supporting the community. um, it's amazing. And the adolescents, the young people I see when they get clean, they are a different breed of people when they're sober, because they are working through very complex and foundational decisions that a lot of people don't get to till later on in life. They're thinking about, what do I do today to be a different person? What do I do today to make sure the things that maybe if I have a resentment from yesterday, how do I deal with that? How many 17-year-olds do you know that that's the way they get up in the morning? But that's what was taught to me. One of the biggest lessons that I learned in the first program I was in, I didn't know how to pray in the morning. My counselor said, just pray in the morning. Who do you pray to? Doesn't matter. I was like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? What if I pray to the wrong, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
um, what if I pray wrong, And but I would always forget. He said, "All right, try this. Throw your shoes under your bed at night. So then
Yep.
you get up in the morning, and then when you're grabbing for your shoes, you'll remember why you're doing that." So I did that, and I had a roommate. His name was Jordan, and I would throw my shoes under there, and I'd crawl under there, but I wouldn't get on my knees and pray. I'd just pray while I was under there, so he wouldn't know what I was doing.
Mhm.
Right? Later, he said, when John would go under his bed, then I remembered that he was going under there to get his shoes because he was supposed to pray in the morning. So I'd pray real quick on my knees while he was under the bed so he wouldn't see me. So, I think that those types of things, like, learning to make amends, to be authentic, good Lord, those are just huge, huge, uh, uh, important skills, connections, to make. And then my conversations with other people were, at an early age, were about that. And that leads, by the time when I was 21 years old, I had two babies in diapers and I was a single dad at 21, 22 years old.
Wow.
And I attribute, the, finding recovery and the support I got in recovery is such a big part of that created or help, with my foundation for stability, and also to trust trust the process. That I could do one day at a time, even though things didn't make sense a lot of times, that I was in a lot of pain and fear, but I was going to show up for my kids no matter what. And I attribute that. I mean, my mom was the warrior who fought for me as well. But
Well, yeah, you mentioned, I was curious about your family. You mentioned that you came from, your parents were conservative, and I'm trying to put some pieces together, and you lived out in the country, but in California. I mean, what was your childhood like?
um, we lived out in the country. Yeah, the people say country in California. Yeah, we lived in 27 acres. One of the most, as a child, there's different times that are just I remember. But in sixth grade, I used to go home after school, put a saddle on a horse, and go riding with a friend. You know, and that experience is just really special. At the same time, my father, who we lost him during COVID, had a significant addiction problem, got sober at different times. He was also a physician, which, in back then, nobody would believe that my dad had a problem, right? Because he was helping so many people. So and he was terrifying. So I had, addiction in the family. My mom is seven of seven, grew up in Houma, Louisiana. That country. That's, I think, where the conservative kind of, my dad grew up in St. Louis, um, and uh, so my mom's seven of seven. The other six siblings all died with complications of addiction. My mom didn't drink at all. I mean, basically, she had, she'd have half a sip of wine, but all the other siblings. So I mean, it's from a, whether it's nature or nurture, definitely there it runs through our family in a big way. And then I'm also a kid who had significant dyslexia. I had difficulty in school, difficulty reading. And I think that impacted just kind of my rebellious nature, because if you school was miserable, so every day. The only time I had any hope was Friday night, and then when June came, I still get depressed in September for all the kids who have to go back to school, just because it was that kind of difficult for me, um, and so but I grew up in a country, and then when I really had a significant substance abuse problem, my mom actually basically divorced my dad because he wouldn't do anything. And she knew, I mean, that things were coming anyway down the pike. I mean, she thought she would stay with him until my sister was older. But when my mom realized that I was going to die, and she went in my closet and found a loaded firearm in there, and we didn't have guns in the house, she was like, "I'm just doing whatever it takes, no matter what
Mhm.
John thinks about it, no matter what anybody else thinks about it."
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So, at Visions, I mean, would you call, is it a true dual diagnosis where you have people who are coming in truly with both, or one or the other? What tell us a little bit more about that.
So a few things. When we first opened Visions, it was a quote unquote dual diagnosis program. And back then, that meant that somebody talked about depression at some point, really. But what we did is Dr. Lewis is our medical director. In fact, Dr. Lewis was the medical director of the program I went through in 1985, and
Oh wow,
now,
how about that?
so you got to be nice to people because I could fire him now, right? I worked for him for 15 years. Now he works here, but he was also one of the original fellows for ASAM. I mean, just really understands that, but he also understands dual diagnosis, and so just not dual. It's just the co-occurring mental health issues or substance abuse issues that people have, right? So we started raising the level of our family programming um, and clinical support from the beginning. And then what happened along the way is, and I remember the first person that called, and he calls me and tells me about his friend's daughter, and I'm like, well, she doesn't sound like she has an addiction issue. And he says, there is no other place. And I said, okay, well, so we talked to the parents. We bring this young girl in. She was 13 years old, and we talked to the clinicians ahead of time, and we did a very good job with her. She had a little bit of psychosis going on, a lot of family trauma going on, and we had always had well-trained licensed clinicians who had incredible backgrounds. Uh, but I think it was part of what made this work is that from a recovery point of view in a treatment program, you treat things kind of like family. There's this connection, support, being willing to sit down with somebody at 1 o'clock in the morning, not just the clinical, you're going to do this, this, and this. So I think that that has an impact on how we respect the kids, treat the kids, and require family involvement. That's the other part. The mental health programs at that point didn't require much family involvement. And with a 13-year-old, it's family, 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 family. So, but at that point, that was the time that we said, we're going to do some things differently. So we started, so this is 16, 17 years ago, we started primary mental health programming. So we have separate facilities that's primary mental health and then separate facilities that are dual diagnosis. And it's not because those kids can't be together, it's because the programming is different. Like, so
Yeah.
the groups that they might have, some of the struggles that they might have, and the kids, and respecting the kids who have primary mental health issues, like, say, anxiety, depression, having, recent suicide attempts. Not that you don't have those in our substance abuse program, because we absolutely do, but that common thread running through of learning to fix feelings, fill that hole inside from substances, that piece you can kind of create a flow and connection and education for the parents, where it's different in the mental health. So that's we've always had um, uh, really a system of excellence for those kids. Another thing that's different about Visions, we are a we just treat all genders. We treat everybody in the same house, not the same
Okay.
rooms, same house. We've always done that. It takes more staff to do that, and there are, of course, complications that you have. But we think that we don't live in a gender-specific world, and so we've always wanted to do that. I think it's better for the kids and better for the parents. Like I said, it does. You have to have better supervision at night. You can't just have one staff on. You got to have two. There's things like that, and you got to figure out ways to coordinate. Um, but I think it makes for a richer environment for the kids. And like I said, the connection for the parents going through this are different. Because I'd rather see if somebody's flirting with somebody else, how do you deal with that? Because it's going to happen when
Yeah.
they leave, right?
Right.
Or if somebody has, this attachment disorder stuff that they cling on the next person that walks through the door, we want to be able to address that in a way that's respectful and authentic.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it is a great point. I've always been a big fan of that, like trying, treatment. I think as much as possible, we need to try and create or simulate environments that is going to bring up real stuff, right? Otherwise, it's just we're kind of, artificially, creating this stuff, and we're not really getting at some of those problems, right?
Look, here's the thing. Here's also, um, just because you have all the same sex in a building together, does not mean there's not sex going on, right?
That's exactly
And
right.
and it's like, well, at least nobody's going to get pregnant. I don't think that's a fair. That's not what we're after here. right?
Mhm.
What we're out, it's any kind of behaviors where somebody is being dishonest, hiding. There's a subterfuge going on. They're obfuscating, what's going on. If they're getting away with something, then they're not connecting. So most important, I think, for us as in a treatment program to create an environment where we can connect and there's authenticity within the community.
What do you do if you do see a burgeoning relationship
You mean every
between
day?
two? Yeah, I mean, but I mean, like a
Every day.
couple in
You,
early
you
recovery. I mean, what do you do?
you'd call it out, especially in
Yeah.
primary residential treatment.
Yeah,
Literally, you come up with the most creative solutions to make sure that these kids that they're not acting out, basically.
Yeah.
And I remember one time, like even when I was in treatment, I had this, I had a girlfriend on the outside, and my therapist said to me, well, um, so do you really think you know who you are? And I'm like, no. And she says,
yeah,
so who is your girlfriend dating?
Great
I was
question.
like, that's not really the point here. But it really was the point, like, if I don't know who I am and I'm learning, what kind of person am I attracting, and as I grew, learned a lot about that as far as relationships are concerned.
I hear you. I mean, there's a reason that it's suggested to not enter into a new one for a while,
Mhm.
for
Yeah.
sure, and that's why I was curious. And so we serve adults only, but we certainly get lots of I mean, if nothing else, I have a lot of people my age are starting to have kids who are Vision's age, and what are you like? You've been working there for 21 years, and you got sober as a teenager. What's different now than it was when you were getting sober and first working in the field in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the mental health? I mean, the drugs
Yeah.
and the substances. What's different?
Sure. Sure. So there's a few things, and these are the things that we started talking about a long time ago. So we started talking about the effect of social media and how that is undermining just I, all I can tell you is it's like parents took their brains and took them out of their heads and tossed them out the window. My kids are going to be fine with the internet. They're not going to be fine. Nobody's fine with it. That's why we
Yeah.
don't give 4-year-olds driver's license, because they're going to drive right off the road. And then we think that the thing that has people talking about horrible things, influences, right? At least in the car, there's not somebody else coming after your kid. And and parents, I think they put these blinders on that doesn't even include what we know now about how gaming and Instagram and Discord and how these things are all designed to hook somebody, and kids are so vulnerable to that. So um, I bring that up to say that a lot, especially our parents that come to Visions, they have sacrificed, figured out ways to be in a neighborhood with the better schools, right? The safer places. They spend a lot, invest a lot, right? And then they buy them the portal to hell,
Yeah.
the worst neighborhood,
Right.
like the worst neighborhood in every
Yeah.
city, in every community. And they're like, I don't know what happened. What do you mean you don't know what happened? They're supposed to make good decisions. No, they're not supposed to make good decisions. They're supposed to make bad decisions, and we're supposed to be there to take care of them. And if you look recently, like the recent book Anxious Generation, it doesn't talk about
Mhm.
substance abuse in there. He wasn't doing research on that, but he's just like, our kids are being it's abusive what we're allowing to happen. So there's that. And you asked about the mental health piece. I think part of this is we're doing a better job seeing things, but there was a study about 4 or 5 years ago, out of Massachusetts, and some people have keyed off on this. Heather Hayes has, but I I went back to school again 4 years ago. That was again, but to get a degree in as an MFT LPCC, and I did a report on, because we see a lot of kids with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, neurodivergence, misdiagnosed. So I wanted to learn more about that as far as substance abuse was concerned. And they looked at an outpatient program in Massachusetts, and all they did was do testing on everybody who came through the door. Like 680 people come through the door. 20% met the criteria for ASD, autism spectrum disorder, coming through the door, self-reporting, voluntarily going to an outpatient program. So that just tells you substance abuse and ASD are very tightly linked.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part was none of those programs had anybody who knew how to assess for, treat, intervene. The family groups weren't designed for this. So those individuals that really need some different support weren't likely going to get that, right? So, and we see that at an exponential rate at Visions because we're having kids who are getting in trouble. It's becoming a problem earlier on, especially with kids who have problems with social connections. They move from like into sixth grade into middle school or what we call uh, uh, middle school. What's the name? Seventh and eighth
Junior
grade.
high?
Junior high. Yeah, I was losing. Sorry. Junior high, the stresses involved there, the connections, the requirements to be able to manage that social pressure. We just see a lot of kids start crashing right around there and going into high school, about the same time that we see kids where substance abuse really starts affecting kids, and for similar reasons, right? So if I have trouble and I'm having these stresses, and then something will fix that, right? Then takes away that stress. Or for a kid who just, they just get on there like this so they can zone out everything else to distract them, whatever that is, then I'm not connecting with the world around me. Then I'm not connecting with my parents who I need. At that time in a kid's life, they need their parents, and they need their, extended family. They need teachers, coaches, clergy, more than ever before. And that's the time when they start separating themselves from it. They start becoming less interested in extracurricular activities. They're doing things that are kind of in moral opposition to their household. So they start separating themselves from any kind of community support that they could get, and it kind of edges away little by little. So when we look at also one of the most misdiagnosed, diagnosis that we see also is anxiety or OCD, anxiety disorders, where you have kids underneath the surface, and those are also kids who are a lot of times high performers, but underneath the surface there is a storm going, and they are feeling just lost. And those are the kids who just one day they're like, I can't go to school. And their parents look at them and say, you're a straight A student taking AP courses. What are you talking about? You can't go to school. You got to go to school. Or these are the same kids who all of a sudden, if they do find a substance, it's like they're teed up because it's going to give them relief. And those are also kids who are really high risk for suicide and self-harm because they hit a wall. They're not good at talking about their feelings, and the wall is, I just can't do this, and I'm just disappointing everybody. And when you add disappointment to somebody who's already has anxiety around doing well, their world collapses. So we see a lot of that, and then we see a lot of trauma. I sat in a group. I was running a group at one of our houses, and I asked the question, what is it that haunts you about your children? Because we all have things, if you've had your kid go to treatment, different things. And in the same room I had one parent say, the sirens. I was holding my son, hoping he would still breathe until the sirens got close enough. And another mom raised her hand and she said it was the blood on me while I was waiting for them to show up. And then another mom, my son was in convulsions, having overdosed. And there's same rooms. There's like 8 families in there, and 3 of the moms held their children, wondering whether they would live or die. And I think we hope that won't happen, but those are the kinds of things that are happening to our kids, and they are struggling with. And I think that, as I have a few soapboxes, this is one of them. The disrespect that we show as adults to our children, so that saying that pot is legal and that it's harmless, or that ketamine is harmless or that psychedelics are harmless, we walk over the graves of our children to justify our recreation. That is absolutely what's going on now. We see psychosis at a higher rate, depression at a higher rate, and um, and and because of the ways the misinformation out there, there's what did they say one day? There's 680 misdirected sites for one that gives accurate information. And our kids are struggling. We literally are seeing higher rates of psychosis from THC than we are from methamphetamine.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you say that. And that's a message that's come up again and again on this podcast without taking a side. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I don't mean that
We've
somebody says, like psychedelics could be helpful. That's not the point.
Right.
That that ketamine could be helpful. That's not the point. Not going to be helpful for somebody who has a significant substance abuse problem, or at least the risks are so high. That's what we have to evaluate. The first thing when I heard about ketamine being used, I said, so how many people are we okay with dying and destroying their lives in order to help other people? And there's always a number there, right? Depending on how helpful it will be, only to find out that they're selling this through, you can mail order for ketamine.
Yeah.
So my concerns are that when we increase access, then we increase the consequence and the negative effects, and kids being able to get a hold of things that they may not have been able to get a hold of so easy before.
Yeah. It is really refreshing. And then just like V said, I mean, we've talked about it on this podcast a lot. We talk about it at New Waters Recovery on a regular basis because we're seeing the same things that you guys are seeing, right? We see people that, whether it's minimization in the household or somebody thought it was okay and it got out of hand, just like whatever, but the devastation that's caused by the minimization of some of these substances is huge. But it's just refreshing to hear somebody, get on that same soapbox. We
Especially
appreciate
somebody
that.
who works with that population
Yeah.
where they're the most susceptible in terms of just starting out their adolescent years, going into adult years with going to treatment and be having episodes of psychosis and
Yeah.
unlocking what's already kind of in some people sort of bubbling under the surface.
Well, the thing about adolescents are we can help them. Substance
Right.
abuse treatment is not, we're not witch doctors. It's not rocket science. It's actually, we know how to help these kids. We know how to support families. It is amazing to me when I talk to parents and I say, look, what we want for your child is have a gleam in their eye toward their future. Like the lights come on. When a parent walks in and they go, you can see their breath as they see their child maybe after 4 or 6 weeks, and they're different. They're the rascal again. They're the one, talking about, so when we're on pass, can we do this? And they're like, they just have a different relationship with their parents. I will say that it takes longer now. Like we have a 45-day minimum. We should probably have a 60-day minimum now, especially because of the amount of THC. It just takes that longer for it to come out. But when parents see that, they're like, I will do whatever I have to do to get to that support for my child, because I can see that, like I said, that gleam, that glimmer, that hope, them talking about their future in a different way, that's part of their process rather than somebody else's process.
I hear you.
Absolutely.
Well, without being abrupt, I think that'll be a good place for us to wrap it up. And John, before we do go, will you tell our listeners and audience how to find you and Visions?
Yes, of course. So the phone number is 818-889-3665. That's 818-889-3665. And then Visions Teen, VISIONSTEEN as in Nancy, .com. That's our website. And then we have a few socials out there and things like that we have. And then don't email me. That would be a bad thing. But if somebody did need to call me, I'll give you my cell phone number. It's 805-302-9936. if I don't answer right away, I'll get back to you as soon as possible. But it also gives our other contact numbers. I just love what I get to do, and the more that we can connect and help people, that it just makes a difference. And thanks so much, you two. B, especially for reaching out. Just really appreciate that. And finding new waters is just. I think you're doing a great job out there and supporting what we're trying to do. A lot of places are just trying to live the dream, right, and give other people the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, thank you,
Yeah,
man.
we
And
appreciate it.
thank you for being, a pillar of our treatment recovery community. And you've got an amazing story, and it's just fun to listen to you. And we will connect all this stuff and get you promoted and all that. But I just again wanted to say thank you for all that you've done, and for our listeners, especially these, because we see a lot of our listeners are parents who have kids.
Yeah.
And Visions is the gold standard for adolescent care for substance use disorder and mental health disorders.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yep. Take care, guys.
Thank
Cool.
you, John.
If you liked what you heard today or just want to know more, give us a call on 919-670-8119 or visit us at newwatersrecovery.com. Thank you.